Welcome, my name is Becky deFrance, and this module is called Instruction of Students with Emotional Behavioral Disorders, Implementing Social Cognitive Theory in the Classroom. Right now, we're going to look at a clip of an extended trailer on a documentary published to highlight teens suffering with emotional behavior disorders. The film is called Who Cares About Kelsey and was put together by Karen Wing in 2013. Let's take a look at some of her behaviors.
Freshman year I came here. They didn't really know my situation.
I got suspended for the intent of selling and possession of a controlled substance. And they were going to report me to the police, but they didn't because it was my own prescription.
No one really helped me. Kind of didn't really care. Sophomore year wasn't good. Second sophomore year wasn't good. School was full of drugs.
There wasn't a day where someone didn't get in a fight or you didn't hear about someone doing drugs in the bathroom. So it was an everyday occurrence.
You can learn the whole story about Kelsey at friendshipcircle.org. There's a blog about her, and I included the link in your handouts. So how do we define emotional disturbance? IDEA 2004, which is a federal law, defines it as a condition exhibiting one or more of the following characteristics over a long period of time and to a marked degree that adversely affects a child's educational performance, and that can include one or more of the following: an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors, an inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers, inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances, a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, and or a tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and look at back at Kelsey here. And by the way, again, this documentary is titled Who Cares About Kelsey? Let's go ahead and look at some of the behaviors that she exhibits of emotional behavior disorders. And as you watch it, think about what behaviors she exhibits that are in line with the definition for emotional behavior disorders.
I overthink about things. I have one verse of a song in my head and I'll sing it over and over again because I can't stop thinking about it.
I don't like taking my medicine.
It makes me not want to eat, not want to sleep. When you have ADHD, you suppress a lot of things, like thoughts and anger and energy, and then one day, like, I am f***ing pissed off.
I've been working my ass off all freaking week just to fail now. It's just a pain in the ass. I just get frustrated with it.
Kelsey has an emotional behavioral disability. The characteristics are someone who's withdrawn, who's impulsive,
Shut up.
who's depressed and anxious and has low self-worth, and those are all the characteristics that Kelsey demonstrates.
When you have like a
So here are some alarming statistics about emotional behavioral disorders. According to one article on social interventions, students receiving special education services for EBD are more likely to fail courses, be suspended, and drop out of school. Post-secondary statistics indicate that 58% of these students are arrested at least once after high school, and 43% have been on probation or parole. So the objectives for today are to compare and contrast the strengths and weaknesses of conceptual models in considering the education of our students with emotional behavior disorders, or EBD, reflect on the reciprocal implications of social cognitive theory between culture, family, and school on a child with emotional behavior disorders, and finally discuss our beliefs about the cause of behavior and its importance in choosing intervention strategies in the classroom. So what are the causal factors of EBD? Well, really there are no simple answers as to what causes emotional behavioral disorders. And yet at the same time we have to guard against oversimplified answers such as low self-esteem or stress. Why is it, for example, that some children with low self-esteem or stress have emotional and behavior disorders and others do not? That's a question that's raised by Kaufman and Landrum from 2013. And then here is just a cover from Time Health magazine that had an interesting issue looking at current trends as possible reasons for why so many millennial teens have anxiety and depression. And a link is included in your notes as well as here on the screen. Conceptual models. So in order to put effective classroom interventions in place, we need a consistent framework to help us understand what practices will work and those that will not. As Kaufman and Landrum explain, one model is not necessarily a cure for all. Some models will work better for certain disorders than others, and you'll see that here in a little bit why. Let's begin with the biological model. Emotional behavior disorders are caused by physiological flaws. And a theory with the biological model is that they can be then controlled through medication. This model is found in science and goes hand in hand with modern medicine. It looks for physiological causes such as genetics, exposure to drugs, hormones, or disease. Besides medication, the biological model also considers the use of interventions such as exercise, diet, biofeedback, and even surgery. And here is an example of 28-year-old male identical twins. The brain on the left is of a person with a healthy, normal brain. And the scan of the patient on the right shows some misconfiguration typical with someone with schizophrenia. So you can see right here where there's some abnormalities. Another example of the biological model is how the endocrine system can be responsible for some behavioral disorders. For example, cortisol release is related to anxiety and other mood disorders. The psychoeducational model, it looks for the unconscious motivations and underlying conflicts. This model takes into consideration the stresses involved between school, home, and the community, and interventions would include therapeutic discussions to help the child understand why they act the way they do. So it's similar to when we may refer a child to go for counseling. Here is a poster actually from the Australian Psychological Society that demonstrates the psychoeducational model in teaching children to use anger management. So it's teaching kids to identify times when they get angry and then expose that self-talk that feeds anger. And then we have the ecological model. The ecological model examines how the student is enmeshed in a complex social system in a variety of roles and settings. It actually originates from Europe. It's a European model that looks at the big picture of the child in society. And the child has roles of both a giver and a receiver. Interventions would emphasize behavioral and social learning concepts and are directed at all facets of the child's life. And then we have the behavioral model, which a lot of teachers, of course, we're most familiar with that model. It's based on the premises that the essence of the problem is the behavior itself, and behavior is a function of environmental events. The behavioral model demonstrates how poor behavior is an inappropriate learned response. And in addition, interventions consist of choosing target responses, measuring their current level, analyzing environmental events, and changing antecedent or consequent events. Here's an example of antecedents, behavior, and consequences that help demonstrate the potential functions of a child at home. The behavioral model helps us to examine behaviors of a child in the classroom and how they possibly experience unintended rewards that help maintain their poor behavior. So we as teachers really need to look to make sure that we are not inadvertently rewarding students for poor behavior and learn how to provide rewards only for those positive behaviors. And finally, here we have the social cognitive theory. The foremost proponent is Albert Bandura. Behavior is created from reciprocal influences among the environment, personal factors, and the individual's behavior itself. According to Boston University School of Public Health, social cognitive theory started in the 1960s as a social learning theory by Albert Bandura, and then it developed into the social cognitive theory into 1986. It uses natural science by weaving together the effects of the environment and the child's perception of the world around him. And it really focuses on personal agency and the ability for people to evaluate their experiences and then regulate themselves. Here is actually just a diagram that kind of explains the model for you. It has the variables of E equaling the environment, the environmental factors, P, the personal variables, which would be expectations, attitudes, what are their cognitive levels, and then their behavior. Okay, so let's take a minute and try to apply what we just learned. We're going to get into groups of no more than 4 people, look at your handout on the conceptual models comparison chart, and discuss in your groups the positive and negatives of each conceptual model. And then choose which one you think would work most in the classroom or best. You may choose more than one, and as a hint, there are no wrong or right answers because, again, some of these models apply better to some instances than others. For example, the biological model we would probably really consider for a child with schizophrenia. So why the social cognitive theory? According to Kaufman and Landrum, the primary concept to keep in mind is Bandura's notion of triadic reciprocality. The social cognitive theory explains why some students may be exposed to the same negative elements and others do not. React to those things. So we cannot look at the child's behavior alone. Behavior must be evaluated in the context of normal development. And we also need to look at how behavior is affected by the person variables and the environment. Okay, let's go ahead and try to apply theory to practice. Here is a case example of a student that we will call Jessica. Her behaviors are avoidance of work and frequent absences. She hides under her desk with a blanket over her head. You approach her about work and she yells and screams bad words. Her person variables are first that she hates coming to school, and like many students with EBD, she has lower cognitive abilities. She has below average verbal abilities, slow processing, and difficulty with even basic calculations such as addition and subtraction. And to further compound things, she has a medical condition in which she has fluid on the brain. And finally, her environmental factors include a mom who abandoned her at a young age. Her dad is an alcoholic who is often out of work. And she lives in poverty, often without electricity. And of course, she does not have many friends. So you can see how these behaviors reciprocate and fester. Now let's look back at Kelsey's story to see what environmental factors may have contributed to her behavior.
He demonstrates.
When you have like a shitty past, you personally like block it out so that you don't remember all the hard times.
When we lived in Georgia, we would have to get up, get dressed. My sister used to wash us in the sink and put baby powder and stuff all over us. My mom was always drunk or high or whatever.
I hate myself for my kids suffering, and I know it's affected Kelsey, and it's probably her way of thinking. I don't like that. I don't like it at all.
When she was younger, I was constantly working. So there was a good chunk of my kids' lives where I wasn't around to follow through with what they were doing.
So you can see how Kelsey's family and her childhood contributed to her current state, the environmental factors.
He demonstrates.
So let's go ahead now and think about Kelsey again, and we're going to try and put theory to practice. And we're going to try to apply what we learned about the reciprocal variables of social cognitive theory. Go ahead and look at the social cognitive theory worksheet for Kelsey. And with what we have learned about her, what variables would you include under each category? So what we're going to do in our group is we're going to just make a short list under each of those variables. Okay, now let's look at some classroom strategies and how we can apply these things that we have learned into our own teaching practice. So according to literature reviews, aggression results from the frustration that students feel when they're faced with academic failure. And because it takes time for a child's academic experiences to stabilize or become consistent enough to begin to affect her feelings about task demands, it might take a while before the child's going to grow frustrated enough to begin avoiding those academic tasks through acting out behaviors. And another explanation is that as students grow older, they become increasingly more aware of their abilities and performances in comparison to their peers. Those noticing that they are behind their peers may become embarrassed by their failures, often leading to negative emotions that may set the stage for increased problem behavior. And definitely try to develop positive relationships and be flexible in your expectations. Studies demonstrate that general education settings for students with emotional behavior disorders are characterized by little reinforcement for pro-social behavior and high rates of responses for disruptive behavior. So definitely try to catch them being good. Okay, and just reflecting more about our classroom strategies here, social skills are defined as a set of competencies that first facilitate initiating and maintaining positive social relationships. So we want to try and levitate our students with emotional behavior disorders toward more positive influences in their peers rather than levitating towards other deviant peers. And contribute to their peer acceptance and friendship development. And then this will result in satisfactory school adjustment and allow individuals to cope with and adapt to the demands of the social environment. And peer tutoring has demonstrated the ability to increase a student's time on task and level of academic engagement, providing immediate feedback on academic performance and allow for increased opportunities to respond. And with peer tutoring too, it takes away from that push and pull between the teacher and the student. It totally takes that defiance out of the equation. And thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that these activities have helped you to reflect on how we can better serve our students with emotional behavior disorders.